Hello dear friends, greetings anywhere in the world where this video will find you. This is pre-Christmas time, so based on some requests that I received from some of my friends, I would like to probably share some memories of my childhood and also tell you a little bit what the month December means to me. So it means two things. One is my grandfather, who would be celebrating his 105th birthday on the 10th of December, and of course Christmas. So so I have a few words about my roots, because in Christmas time we usually somehow slow down and become a bit more nostalgic, and a bit more sentimental, and we return in memories back to our roots and where we came from. And a significant part of my roots is my granddad. Thanks to him and grandma and my family, I must probably say that I come out of a family of rebels, people who they did never anything bad, but they definitely also lived by their own beliefs and own own beliefs. Maybe that would be about the best way to express it. My great-grandfather married my great-grandmother, and one of them was Catholic and one of them was Protestant. And obviously at that time, that might have, now it's not an issue at all. At that time it would have been an issue. My granddad, who was Czech, married grandma who was German with some Jewish blood in her. So again, plenty of potential for misunderstandings, miscommunications, misinterpretations, and so on. But it never really happened. I'll probably go back to my great-grandfather, whom I met only as a little girl, and I was a bit scared of him, because he wasn't the greatest person, I guess, who knew how to communicate with children, and he was also unwell at the time. But when he was young, there was World War I, and in World War I he was obviously conscribed to the Austro-Hungarian army. He was taken to Russia to fight in Russia, and and later on he left the army there and became a part of the Czechoslovakian Legion. So I don't know if you heard about that, but they were basically soldiers who joined the Czechoslovak Legion, that obviously didn't fight on the side of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He returned from war instead of 1918. He actually returned in 1921. He had to basically cross the whole of Siberia with his battalion, sometimes on foot, sometimes by train, and so on. And the most significant thing about my great-grandfather was that although he was you would say private in the English sort of terms, he was just a foot soldier in the front lines. He got never even scratched by a bullet. So there were people, dying left and right. Sometimes, people hit by grenades and so on, but he never even had a scratch. And he told my grandfather when he returned, he said, it's maybe also because I actually never aimed at anyone. So even in the biggest, fights and in the biggest conflicts there, he was always aiming over the heads of the enemy, because he firmly believed that even the enemy are fathers, brothers, sons of somebody, and that he will not contribute to the loss of those people who are obviously important and loved by their families, and he won't contribute to their death. So that was quite interesting. And my granddad married grandma in, I think, 1932, or 33. And because he was working at the railway in Sudetenland, which was the border area of Czechoslovakia, and that was inhabited mainly by Germans, but there were also Czechs living there to a lesser extent. And so, Czechs and Germans were getting along pretty well until about 1939, when Hitler and his madness started. And the Czechs were then had to leave. They were basically kicked out. And then in 1945, when the war finished, then it was the Germans who were kicked out, by the Czechs. So it was obviously at some stages there was quite some bad blood and so on. But again, Granddad, he sort of never believed in these people are right and these people are wrong. He always took things individually, and he always sort of was saying, well, this person and that person is actually, whether Czech or German, they're actually really good people, and they just were swept away by the tides of the war and whatever it presented and so on. So during the war, it was Granddad had to leave actually Sudetenland and his wife and his 2 children behind, and he had to go. That was just a must. There wasn't any other option. He had to go to the protectorate of the Czech and Moravia state. However, he always found a way how to cross illegally the borders, and how to go and visit grandma, even at the cost of being shot at and or sometimes he always found a way somehow. And one thing to say, he was never afraid. He just said, fear cripples you. So fear stops you from doing a lot of things that you would otherwise do. So if you take precautions, and if you, plan a little bit, and then leave the rest to luck and to fate. So after the war, when the Russians came, obviously you could imagine the difficult times for my grandma and my mom and auntie, who were at that time, they just spoke German and so on. And when the Russians came, there apparently was a lot of plundering and raping and so on. Again, one needs to understand what happened to their country, and so I don't believe that it gives right to anybody to plunder, but one could maybe understand why some of those people would be doing that. So Granddad stood up for his wife, stood up for his daughter, and pretty much facing the a few Russian soldiers who wanted to plunder his house and obviously harm his wife and children. He was just saying, he just reached sort of behind him, and as if he has got a gun at the back, and he said, yeah, you will kill me, but I'll take a few with me. And then one of their superiors came, and Granddad spoke to him, and somehow he managed to basically convince convince him to just move on and go elsewhere, not like elsewhere to plunder, but leave him and his family alone and just continue on their way wherever they were going to. And that was something that was probably quite significant, because a lot of people got killed, got harmed, and so he was also helping some of the German widows who lost their husbands in the war, and they were friends in the past, they were friends before the war, and so on, and then they were kicked out with 20 kilos or 25 kilos of stuff that they could take, and that was it. And I was a widow with a little child, with a baby, basically. And she had to cross the border to Germany, and sometimes she was coming at night, and Granddad was giving her food and so she could feed her baby and getting her some clothes and stuff. So and he did it for more than just one. After the war, when 1948 came, and communism took over, they pretty much, Granddad and Grandma lost pretty much everything, but it didn't matter, because Granddad and Grandma were then employed in a convenience store, and he was always the person who would say, well, whatever job I do, I'll do it well. So I as a little kid, I witnessed whenever we went to open the store in the morning, he would go there, and he might be tired, or he might be whatever, but the moment he opened those doors to the women, mainly sort of women who were waiting in a queue already, there would be this huge smile, laughter, joking, and that sort of inviting presence that he always had, and therefore he was loved. And Grandma again was loved because of her gentle, sort of quiet presence there, and hard work. So that's like a short sort of history of my Granddad and Grandma and my family. But then, when I was born, it was the very, very early 60s. Granddad was everything to me, because my father wasn't in my life. He, so Mum divorced Dad when I was about 1 year old, or even younger, shortly after I was born, I think, actually. And so Granddad stepped in. It was like, that's fine. I will, I'll step in and I'll do whatever I can do to make sure that you don't miss out on anything. So whenever, when I was a kid at school, and the teacher would say, okay, children, tell your daddies maybe to build a feeding, like a little house for birds, where birds could either nest or be fed over the winter. And then she would look at me and say, and Helenka, you tell your Granddad. And so that was common knowledge. Nobody really was thinking twice about it, and Granddad built whatever he needed to build, and that was fine. And when I was very, very little, I loved to play Sleeping Beauty. So whenever Granddad sort of came home from work in the evening, and sometimes he was tired, he had a full day of work behind him, and I would run to the sofa and lay on the sofa, pretend that I am asleep, and Granddad had to come and kiss me on the forehead and be my prince and wake me up, and then Grandma had to sit at the piano and play some music, and there was a big ball, and we had to dance, Granddad and I, and we had the ball, and then that all took only about like 5 to 10 minutes, but that was my Granddad's every evening ritual while I was little. And then when I grew up, there were other things. He built me a swing out of, at that time there wasn't like Bunnings or hardware stores or things to buy. He just made it all from scratch. He built me, those gym rings that you also do like exercise on, and other things. So I had like a little jungle gym in my backyard, and he taught me even several sort of exercises and acrobatics on it, because he was a keen participant in the YMCA between the wars. So so he taught me a lot. He played soccer with my 2 neighboring boys and myself. He taught me how to climb trees. He taught me how to cut grass with a scythe, is it? How to look after animals. And he had always that philosophy, live and let live. So, sorry. So even when I would walk and there would be a little ant or something crawling on the ground, he would say, make sure you don't step on it. It wants to live too. And that sort of philosophy extended to his to people, because he would always say, well, doesn't matter what religion, what philosophy, what beliefs, what nationality, and so on. They all just want to live in peace. And we want the same, so let's just live and let live. He would fix everything. He was the person who was able to fix everything, to rebuild everything. He would be able to build a house. He would be able to install electricity. He would be able to repair my sled. When my dog took me once for a ride in winter, and I was riding the sleigh, and the dog was pulling the sleigh, and then he saw a rabbit and he chased the rabbit into the forest. I got knocked off the sleigh, and then my dog returned with just a few little planks and things, leftovers from the sleigh. And then I went home crying and saying, Grandpa, the sleigh is broken. And so, and he would say, well, that's no big drama. Let's go to the shed and we'll fix it. We had a big barn, so he always had all these huge things in the barn. And he taught me how to smooth out like planks of wood with the, with the old tools, with the very old sort of carpenter tools and so on. So I sometimes think, oh my gosh, if he saw Bunnings nowadays, he would be amazed, all the stuff that he could get there, and pre-prepared and prefabricated and so on. He had this incredible sense of justice. So he would be like, he'd be saying, there are certain things between heaven and earth that you really need to respect, and you really, there seems to be, although he wasn't like a great believer of anything, but he always believed in this sort of higher justice, and definitely in consequences. He said there are certain things and certain boundaries that you don't cross. So for example, when there were some guys in the pub and they just buried their friend passed away, and they came from the funeral and they got a bit drunk, and they dared one of the friends, and they said, how about, you'll be probably scared, and so on. Are you a scary cat? And he said, no, I'm not a scary cat. So we dare you to go back to the cemetery and pull out the cross from the friend's grave and bring it here to the pub. And he said, of course I'm not scared. So he went and pulled out the cross from the grave, brought it to the pub, laid it on the table, won the bet, and then close to midnight, everybody went home, and they left him there with the cross. And he said, what do I do with the cross now? And they said, well, you take it back and put it back where you got it from. So he went, and he went at midnight, around midnight, to to the cemetery, and was trying to shove the cross back, into the hole, and make it nice and straight and so on. And as he's shoving, he's feeling that something is grabbing him and pulling him down towards the grave. And because he was drunk a little bit, and he was not quite rational, he started to panic, because he thought it's his friend who got really offended, his dead friend who got really offended. And he was pulling him into the grave as punishment for what he has done. And so he just dropped the cross and went home screaming and so on. And the next day, when they sort of went there before, the widow saw the disaster and put the cross back in, he actually started to think rationally, and he realized that, because he was a blacksmith, and he had this long apron, that the bottom part of the hem of the apron got caught by the edge, by the pointy part of the cross. And as he was shoving it into the hole, obviously, the more he was shoving the cross into the hole, the more the apron was pulling him down. And that was the real reason, But from that, the moral of the story that my granddad told me was, you don't play with these things, because, you'll find out, somehow you will be told that, sometimes somebody up there is playing a joke with you a little bit and shows a sense of humor. But, sometimes it can become quite serious. And so don't play with fire. Don't, things that should be kind of left alone, leave them alone. And don't tempt fate. So he was also a great storyteller. So the stories he was telling me were not about princes and princesses. They were more about, two prisoners of war in Russia who escaped from the camp and were, running, from the soldiers who were shooting after them in the middle of a Siberian winter. And they were running through this deep snow until they came, to a snowed in road. And on that road was they could just hear little bells and bells of horses. And there was a horse team, pulling a sleigh, and that sleigh had boxes on it. So, they thought, oh, well, what a wonderful opportunity. And they climbed into one of the boxes and thought, we'll catch a ride wherever this guy is going. So that's good. At least we'll get out of here. And so they were going and riding, traveling and until wolves started to howl around. And there was this, this howling of a pack of wolves. And of course the coach guy, the guy with the whip, got scared for his horses. The horses shied, they took off. And of course the only box that fell onto the road was the box with these two guys in it. And then, the story goes on how they managed to actually, get a wolf. There was this biggest wolf sort of walking around that box and really curious what's in it, and could smell that fear and potential for a good meal. And they managed, it was like a hole in that box, and through that hole they managed to get the wolf's tail, and then how the wolf is actually, panicked and is basically started to take off and pull that box behind him. And until, the wolf was very exhausted, but, it pulled it all the way to Moscow, to the main square, where it was early in the morning. And, all the bakeries were open and they were selling piroshki, which is a Russian sort of food. And that was the end of the story, but the detail, I could feel the Russian winter. I could feel that fear of the horses, and the the guy who was just trying to get those horses going, you know. I could feel those wolves being curious about, you know, what's in that box. And that main wolf, you know, he would always walk around and then he would whack that box with his tail, you know, just that force of the whack. I would hear those bullets, you know, whistling past my ears from the guards, you know, and I would smell the piroshki in Moscow on the main square, you know. So he could say that in such a way that was just absolutely, you know, it drew you into that story. And he told me more stories. He told me stories about, you know, my great-granddad, that's a true one, you know, being at the Baikal Lake in Siberia, and how they befriended a cub of a bear, and how that cub grew up among the battalion, and all the stuff that they have experienced with that bear until it became an adult. He told me about a defenestration of a I think he was a minister of Foreign Affairs in the Czech around 1948. How, you know, there was some contention about whether he committed suicide or whether he fell out of a window or whether somebody helped him. So, you know, he told me about that. And so the stories that he told me about were also full of geography and or history. You know, it wasn't princes and princesses. It was sort of semi, you know, at least the true background to it would be the geography, would be the weather patterns that were there, would be the culture of the people that were there, and so on. So great storyteller, wonderful storyteller. And I think, you know, he maybe just passed something of that on to me. So he is, you know, if we were in narrative therapy to talk about roots and about the important people that form our root system, our metaphorical root system, he would be definitely there. And when I was about 14 and we moved away from our little village in the on the border, Czech-German border, and we moved to a bigger city, I experienced some bullying in the 6th grade. So I would be about 12 actually. And it was quite severe actually, that bullying and so on. And Granddad was supporting me throughout that time too, you know. He was supporting Mom back, way back throughout the divorce, you know. He was just there for me. And at that time I know I was quite angry, and I was saying, if only we didn't move, you know, to this goddamn city, I wouldn't have to go through all this emotional torment. And Granddad looked at me and smiled. And now you have to forgive me for, it sounds much better in Czech than in English, but the gist of it was, Helenka, if only there were fish swimming in people's asses, then there wouldn't be need for ponds. And that kind of shut me up. It was like, what? And he said, you know, the what if and if only and the should and shouldn't, those are things that are completely useless. So, you know, if there is a situation, either write it out, grow some strength, deal with it, or just sit with it until it passes. And it will, you know, it will always pass. So, you know, you've got family here, you've got people who, you know, who support you and who love you, and that's the main thing that you need. And the rest, you know, is up to you, and you will work it out. You will. So yeah, so that was him. I must say that when I went finally, you know, when I studied my psych degree at the Charles University in Prague, all the marks, all the high distinctions that I got, I didn't do for me, I did it for him. Because the most beautiful thing was when I used to come by bus or when I used to drive back from Prague and from an exam, and Granddad would look at me and would be saying, "So, what did you get?" And I would say, "Oh, Granddad, high distinction." And he would be like, "I knew it, I knew it, I knew that you can do it," you know. So I don't know if he was actually doing it for me. So he motivated me on the sly, sort of. Or if he really, you know, was really that pleased. But definitely, you know, my marks from that uni were they were like my gift to him. And much later on, I had to write that was an essay or something about the person that I respect the most. And I have big respect, you know, that, I mean, I was blessed with the family that I had and that I was born in. It was, you know, a very, very simple, very, you know, village life, come on. But there was so much warmth, and there was so much love, and there was so much of everything that a child needed. It was there for me. And so I wrote about actually a person somewhere, you know, out there in the world who was also a person that I very much respected. And so, but after I wrote it and I looked back, maybe a few years passed between, you know, I said, "You silly girl, you wrote about this person, which is, you know, they deserve it. But the most person that deserves your utmost respect and love and deserved it every single day when he was in your life was right here in front of you, you know." So that was something for me to remember. And this way I sending this into the virtual world, you know, whoever comes across this, it's like a bit of a reminder, you know, for those of you who were lucky enough to have a person or persons in your life or in your family that was sort of always there for you and who was always supporting you in some way, who was probably not using too many words, but showing all that love and all that support and all that solid base that you just needed, and that safety, showing it in deeds. And it was him. He was, you know, he could be quite talkative, but whatever he said was always, without miss, backed up by deed. And that's what I learned from him. And that's what I'm, you know, trying to do with more or less success. And, you know, to say a little bit more, like just to end this, is that he was not only that he actually replaced my father, he replaced my son's father as well, who was in my son's life only for a year and then left as well. So Granddad was there again. You know, he was in his late 70s. And nothing ever was impossible. Granddad, obviously, and Grandma. And I'll talk about Grandma in one separate video. But, you know, he was there for him. And whatever he taught me when I was a little kid, he taught my son and more. Because my son was probably even more receptive to, you know, he showed interest in car mechanics, for goodness sakes. You know, I wasn't that interested in how a car works, you know, and so, but my son was. So he showed him everything, and they used to go and collect stuff that they would maybe need for later. He wasn't a hoarder, but he definitely, when you needed a screw or when you needed a tool or when you needed something, he would go into his shed or his garage and he would find it. And he was solid too, you know, like solid physically. He was resilient. Like one day, my son was, I think, with him down near the there was like a row of you can call it sheds or so, where we had coal and where we had wood and stuff for the winter. And Granddad was climbing up to the roof of it on a ladder. He was in his probably 80s by then. And the ladder was sort of just leaning right on the edge of the roof. And somehow it slipped when he was about to climb onto the roof, and it slipped and it slid under, and Granddad fell backwards. All this height down, he landed on his back. He was winded a little bit, but he, Mum came to him, ran to him, and they all thought, oh my gosh, something happened. He must have broken his back or something. And no, he laid around a little bit for a few minutes, and then he got up again, and he went, kept working, whatever he was doing, So he was of a strong stock. At 65, he started renovating a house, and houses in Europe are probably not like houses in Australia. They very solid. They have thick stone walls and stuff. So he started renovating the house, and it was quite often that I saw him running from the cellar up to the attic, which was 2 stories up, and he was having on one shoulder one bag of cement, and on the other shoulder another bag of cement, and carried it up into the attic to do whatever renovations he was doing up there, and that was normal for him, and he used to clean the chimney. So we had about 3 chimneys, and they were right on the roof of the house, and the house, so imagine the cellar, 2 stories, and then the attic, so a fairly high house, and he would climb from the attic through the little window onto the roof, and he would balance. Even at 80, he would balance on the roof with a brush, and the brush had like a weight on it, and he would let it go down with that weight into the chimney all the way down to the ground floor, and clean like the chimney sweep, and he would clean the chimney. And one day we heard this boom, 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 boom. And we thought Grandma came, Grandma was cooking, and she just went running as fast as she could out the door in front of the house, because she thought that he just slid down the roof and fell onto the ground. No, he was up on the roof, and he was saying, no, all good, just that the weight came off. And the weight it was sort of half suspended still through the chimney, and it sort of flew down the chimney and landed, on the ground where the oven was. So, so that was that was my granddad. There was never any work that he would say, I can't do that. As I said, he would, professionally, he was working in that convenience store, and up to about 65, and then after that, when he was retired, he just took on all these projects and kept, physically working until pretty much his almost last days. He would still attend to the animals and to the rabbits and that we had, to the dog, and animals loved him. Like we had a little dog that we found in front of, in the middle of winter, and the dog was a puppy, and it was obviously left there, or it found its way to us, and it's obviously ended up with us, and it ended up with Granddad, because Granddad was his human. We were just the pack, but Granddad was the leader, and he always had that leading ability without wanting to prove anything. He just did it. It was just, this is how it is. This is what needs to be done, or what needs to be lived, or what needs to be experienced. So let's experience it. Let's do it without fear. Don't be scared. And So I wanted just to pay this tribute to him, because he taught me a lot, and he was a great sort of mover and shaker in my life. Great influence. And the older I get, the more I sort of think of him and remember him and my grandma and my family, and I just count my blessings, how incredibly blessed I was, living a very simple life, but a very loved sort of life. And that included my son, and that included my auntie and my grandmother and my mom. So at this Christmas time, I thought I'll share that with you, and I will, hopefully it might motivate you to think back and think, so who was that person in my life that made my life special, my Christmas special, my, my childhood special, and give them some thought and give them some of your fond memories. And otherwise, for Christmas, I wish you all a blessed Christmas season. And for the next year, lots of health, goodwill, good people around you, good friends. I wish you to find kindness within yourselves and give it freely to others. That's all from me for now. So I'll see you all in the new year. Bye.